So on Wednesday night and Thursday morning, I was stuck dealing with a stomach bug that had me quite wiped out. And even though I'm 2 days away from the last symptoms, I'm just feeling very tired. And this morning I was sitting trying to muster energy, knowing I needed to come and share a story. And sometimes you're looking for that moment of inspiration, and then this great moment came when I'm thinking of my children brushing their teeth, and my oldest just got a brand new toothbrush, because Grandpa has a toothbrush that you turn on with a battery and it spins. Zzz. He is so excited, so he just got one like that. And so he goes in, fires it up, zzz, brushing his teeth. So proud of himself. He brushes like 8 times a day. And my wife turns to my little one, he's almost 2 now, my almost 2-year-old, and she says, "Okay, Jad, it's time to brush your teeth." And he grabs his toothbrush, holds it up, and goes, and he sticks his toothbrush in there and starts going. That toothbrush moment was not good for my microphone. But as he stood there vibrating his head, which I will not repeat, the funny thing is he doesn't need that other toothbrush. He's got exactly what he needs, because in his mind, he has created the very thing that he thinks he wants. So he no longer needs the real thing, because he's got his own. And he's happy with that. And I think that's something that lots of us kind of run into as we're trying to figure out life, as we're trying to find a way to create something because we've seen it out there, and we're not sure how we create it, so we just find a way to make it feel as close as possible, and then we're just happy with that. And I think in some ways that can be a good thing, but some ways it can be a hard one. So I'd like to return to this scripture reading. This has been an interesting story, this siege of Samaria, because I've done 4 different sermons, but this is my theme, and all 4 sermons were different. There just seems to be a number of things in there that matter. You have this setting where there's a whole group there's a whole army surrounding the city, and there's a group of people inside that have decided that this is safer than fighting. And that was kind of the ancient warfare tactic. There's this huge army coming. If we create thick enough, high enough walls and a big enough barrier, we'll make sure nobody can hurt us. But the irony is, the direct effect of that was there was a new battle tactic, which was the siege. And we either can break through those walls and get to you anyway, or more often we just seal up the walls for you and let you suffer on the inside. If you want to wall up from everyone, we'll just stay camped around you. You have nowhere to go, and so you'll start imploding on yourselves anyway. And that's what we see happening at this place, is that Samaria has set itself up with its huge walls, its big armaments. They cannot be attacked. And as the king of Aram is trying to get in there, he's not having any luck. But inside we see the story before we get to this text that we read. And we see that what's shaping is that they're getting to the point where they're willing to make deals with other people that none of us would ever want to have to make. And if you read that section again, leading up to this, you can see what that area is. But then we get to this very unique spot. We already know that Elisha has already predicted that there's going to be an end to this coming very soon. And it says, "Now there are 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, 'Why stay here until we die? If we say we will go into the city, the famine is there, we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die.'" So here's this group that's kind of outside of the walls. They're not in the main walls, but they are inside walls. So they're watching what's happening on the inside of the city. And between their own disease that they have and then what's happening in the city, they know they don't want back in. That's an absolute disaster. So they're in this middle section. There's a small group of them. But they're saying, if we stay here, we're going to die too. And it's not just the food. They also have leprosy. So they're deteriorating anyway. And the more you're stuck in a spot that doesn't have outlet, that doesn't have cleanliness, that doesn't have freshness, the worse it's going to be. And so they see themselves as basically stuck with 3 options. We go into the city where the mindset that these walls are protecting us as they absolutely war and destroy each other and steal from each other and attack each other. We stay here where at least we're not a part of all that mess, but our own disease will kill us. Or we risk going out of the city, facing the enemy, but who knows what God might do. And in a way, I think that's kind of a very deep version of the situation with the toothbrush. In that there's this glory that could be, and for my 1-year-old, that glory is that vibrating toothbrush. But the question is, what do we do about it? Do we pretend that we already have it, despite what the evidence is around us? And we just shake ourselves enough that we're sure it's happening? Or do we step out and actually take on something else that could lead to something better? I have a couple stories here that I think are a direct illustration of this. The first one is in 1 Samuel chapter 10. Actually, we'll start in chapter 9, verse 20. The prophet Samuel has been commissioned to get a king for Israel. And it's something that was not designed, but the people are crying out for a king, and so there's a problem with it. And Samuel finds this guy, Saul, and God says, this is the guy you're supposed to talk to. And Samuel does this nice little talk to him and says, and to whom is the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your father's family? So you are the desire of men, you're going to be the king. Isn't that great news? And Saul answered, but am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? Is not my clan the least of all the clans in the tribes of Benjamin? Why would you say such a thing to me? So here's this huge news for this lowest of the low person. His job is to go out and find the animals that are lost. And he's told, God chose you to be the king. And his reaction is, I'm not good enough for that. You've got the wrong guy. The second story happens in Judges chapter 6. And we see Gideon threshing wheat in a winepress, obviously terrified of what could happen around him. And an angel shows up to him and says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And you can instantly sense, not only in this direct answer from him, but in the rest of the chapter, you can instantly sense Gideon basically saying, you have got to be kidding me. Mighty warrior? Just by evidence alone, you should know that's true. But I know me, and I am not a mighty warrior. And his response is almost identical to Saul's. He says, let's see. He says in verse 15, he says, but Lord, how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. We have this same exact response about, I'm not good enough for this. I'm just a little guy. I can't do all this. And the interesting thing is, what is God thinking? Why is he going to people that not only are not recognized by the people as being strong? I think most of us can wrap our minds around that. If you found some guy that's used to being the dominant character in all of society, and he's used to being the top dog, and you go to him, we can kind of see how that might not fit into what God's plan is. But why does he go to people where they themselves don't believe in their own capability? Why is he choosing people that resist him on the idea they could even do anything great? Because that, I think, is a little bit more unique. And yet here he is saying that, and the amazing thing is watching these two people react from it. Saul, it says that as Saul turned to leave Samuel, this is in chapter 10, verse 9 of 1 Samuel. As Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart, and all these signs were fulfilled that day. And it goes on to tell about how he's able to prophesy with the prophets, and he's going along. So Saul actually experiences the transformation. It says God changed him that day, right there, bam. He's changed. And as he starts walking away, he's able to do these miraculous things. And so it's like, oh, well, now he would surely know. Now he gets it. But then as you fast forward to 1 Samuel chapter 10, we see in verse 20, we see that Samuel brings all the tribes together. He makes the big announcement, and he announces, Saul, and now your new king, Saul. Nothing happens. Saul, and nothing happens. And not only does the search come up fruitless, they actually have to ask God, literally, where is Saul? And he says, he is hidden among the baggage. Which, first of all, I think there's a lot of us, if we took our modern usage of what that term baggage can mean, I think there's a lot of us that are hidden among our baggage. I know I've been there. But the thing is that they have to pull Saul out, force him in front of the group. And what we see from then on is that regardless of what God does in terms of miracles, in terms of transformations, in terms of signs and wonders, Saul always goes back to one main thing. And that's a sense that it's hopeless, that he's not good enough. And so he keeps trying to do anything he can to cling to stuff. And his fear, his sense of low value, keeps forcing him to make these terrible decisions. And whether it's the witch at Endor, or it's him making the sacrifices himself and not waiting for Samuel, there's a lot of these stories that happen after this, the pursuit of David and the attacks on him, all of them are rooted in fear and never in something that's best for the nation. He's not able to ever see himself the way God sees him initially. There's always a barrier. And then we look at Gideon, and it's quite the opposite. God shows him sign after sign, but unlike Saul, who, you see the sign, he does his things, and then you know nothing, and all of a sudden he's got the moment. This one's the opposite. Gideon asks and asks and asks, and he says, well, can you do this to show me? And fire comes down from heaven, and can you do this? Okay, now can you do it the opposite? And he has to keep being won over. And then even as he's hearing God speak, do this to test and get rid of these people, do this, still right before that final battle, God has to give him another reminder. Go down into the camp, listen to what the enemy's saying. And when he hears the dream, he says, okay. And so that's when he's willing to do it. But the difference is, regardless of how much time it took him, when that moment comes, he does the unthinkable, and he and 300 guys not only start screaming and yelling to attack 135,000 people, but they do it where they break the light, the jar so the light shines. So it's kind of like, here I am, ah! And in battle strategy, that's not really a good idea, usually. But he's taken hold of this idea that I know I'm not capable. I don't know what's going on here. But I know that God has entrusted this to me. God can do something, so I'm going to trust him in it. And all of a sudden you have this mighty, mighty victory. And so you have these two stories that start in an identical fashion, and they splinter off into dramatically different directions. And the question is, why do those both happen? How do they happen? And really, why are they in the Bible? Because I'm sure there's millions of stories that could have been inspired into thought. And yet here's these totally diverse stories that start with almost identical wording. And the thing is that I think it's a very direct message to the nature of the combination of the human spirit and what Satan tries to do in us. We have this amazing potential. And I know that one time I was talking to a student that was feeling very frustrated. And I said something, I said, I really appreciate what you did. That was a good job. It shows your character. And they said, I don't have a good character. I said, I think you do have a good character. And they said, no, I know. I'm not good enough. I'm not good. You must have seen something you liked, but I know me. And I said, well, the reason I know you have a good character is because God made your character. And so I know it's good. The question is, something in between has happened to make you kind of shift off to this other mindset. And there's just this long pause. As you can tell, they're trying to process that. God created my character. Because often we get kind of the guilt side. We get hit with what you should not be doing and those reminders of what you should not be doing. And the problem is what I see Satan over time doing is finding more and more and more ways to attack. And just like in a skit, as they're talking about trying to undermine the value of prayer, we can look at periods of time and see the direct strategy that evil had. And sometimes it's so blaringly obvious, like the Dark Ages, as there's an official attack, and if you're going to open a Bible, you'll be killed, and if you're going to choose Christ, you're going to be killed, and there's this fear and this separation. We see times where people are illiterate, and the only people that are allowed to read the Bible are ones that have a filter and are allowed to change what happens. And so we see that mindset. What I see happening today is that Satan has taken the mindset of how we approach God and taken things that have a truth to it and just started to subtly twist them. And all of a sudden things that are true in a way have lost their value, and that little bit of value loss has transformed the entire picture of God's character and who he is. I deal daily with students and families. So my job is to hear stories, to talk to people, to get to know students, to get to know families. And often I've been at church as people talk about how often, there's probably someone here that's going through something, we haven't recognized it. And I think we're all aware of how that can happen. We can show up at church, we can say happy Sabbath, how are you doing? Great, how are you? Great. And then we wait till next week and we do it all again. I think we all know that happens. But my job is to hear those stories. Because at some point, there's a point where someone needs to tell someone. Maybe it's because of some output that could happen in the classroom. Maybe it's because of some challenge that they're dealing with that they need input from, and maybe an educator is helpful. And so I get to start hearing those stories. And I remember hearing a story one time, and I wish I could remember who gave this quote. Maybe someone out there can remember it. But I heard a quote where someone said essentially this: if you could go back in time and watch the events of your enemy's life, you'd find a point where they experienced such pain you could no longer see them as an enemy. And I think that's really the heart of it, is that as we look at our stories, we set up walls. There's walls between churches because this one's too traditional, not traditional enough. It's too conservative, it's too liberal. We set it up between the world and us because your standards are low and ours are high. We set it up between ourselves and someone else saying, I've tried and tried and tried and you're just not giving me anything. And in a way, there's some merit to that because we are trying to reach for something. We're trying to train our children to become something. But often what's happened is that in the meantime, we've lost track of what it is that actually transforms the heart. And I think when I look at the controversy that happened in the Adventist system even, just about righteousness by faith versus righteousness by works, there's this huge dilemma because we're saying we don't want to just say, oh, you can do whatever you want, no problem, go live however you want and it'll just be fine. Because then we see that lives aren't changed and the misery still comes and the consequences still come and it doesn't transform the heart into something that matters. But at the same time, we know that if you're working and working and working and you're the one taking control, then you're not trusting yourself to God. It's not God working in you. And so there became this dilemma. And I think that dilemma is summed up perfectly in two texts. One is John 14:15. Some of you may know that one as a memory verse. It says, if you love me, you will obey what I command. And the other one would be the woman caught in adultery, where as she's finally by herself, Jesus has said, you who is without sin, cast the first stones. He's written in the sand. He says, where are your accusers? She says, they're gone. He says, neither do I condemn you. I don't hold you guilty. Go and sin no more. And we take those and we say, well, there's that paradox. We're going to say, I don't condemn you, but you better not do it again. If you love me, it's love, well, but then you'd obey. And so then there's this tension between the two, and what we don't know what to do is which one of those two wins. And I think that's where that half twist has come, because as we deal with life, as we're a Saul or a Gideon, the stresses of what's happening around us, the weight of life, the desires of what we wish we could become, who we wish we were, are tugging on us. And as they're tugging on us, we're trying to make decisions for the future. And Saul fell prey to this idea that he couldn't do enough. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You're not good enough. And that's what started to take over. And I look at the situations that I deal with on a daily basis, and I think that's really the heart of what's happened. Is I think that Satan has started to say that if you make that mistake, if you're not loving enough, if you still have a sin, then you need to put that shouldering of guilt on, carry it around for a little bit, remember what that feels like, and then go see if God's going to let you back out of that again. And there's some merit to that, just in the simple fact that we don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to keep doing this thing, so it said, well, yeah, I need to carry some guilt around. But the thing is that God offers a few things over and over. And just to throw out a few, I think we could probably come up with a list, but peace, joy, and love. Does those sound three that seem to be something that God talks about that should be rooted in us? A peace that passes all understanding. Can you have peace and guilt at the same time? it's just by definition not possible. Because guilt is when there's a lack of peace because of something you've done. And so already when you start placing that guilt, I shouldn't have done that. Can't believe I did that again. By nature in that moment, you're separating yourself from peace. And so when we look at this context of John 14:15, which I think is a great example of it, one of the challenges I think that happens sometimes is we make these nice Bibles that are some, the women's devotional Bible, and pretty soon we start wanting to make it simple, so we start putting in headings and all this stuff. Chapters are important so we know where to find things. But here we have this gap, and in most Bibles, right at John 14:14, there's a gap and a line, and it says something about Jesus' promise of the Holy Spirit or something. And so it's segmented, and so we can read this thing, pause in our mind, new topic, because there's a gap and a new heading. If you love me, you will obey what I command. So then we wrestle with that. What does that mean? When you look at the flow, Jesus hasn't stopped talking. So we're literally cutting off his conversation right in the middle. And what he's been saying so far is talking about what the disciples are capable of, what his followers are capable of. And he's saying, you are going to be able to do greater wonders and signs than I have ever done. And you just think about that alone. You can do greater things than Jesus has ever done. That doesn't even seem possible. He's calling us to something that's beyond what some of us can fathom. And yet that's what he's saying right there. And then he says, believe me that when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. So is he saying that you better do what I've been doing? You better raise people from the dead? Because if you don't, you're not having faith. That's not the context there. I don't think I've ever heard someone feel that way. Because he's instead talking about what you can do. Look at what I've done. Look at what the Father does in me. Look at even the miracles that he's done through me themselves. If you have the faith, you can do these things. In fact, you will do greater things than these because I am going to the Father, and I will do whatever you ask in my name so that the Son may bring glory to the Father. So it's me working in you. You may ask me for anything in my name, and I will do it. So he's saying everything, miracles, what you need done in you, everything is me working. And the next sentence says, if you love me, you will obey what I command. Can that really be that it's suddenly a step out? I'm going to do everything in you. I'm going to do it through you. I'm going to be the one that makes it happen. I'm going to make you able to do more miracles than ever. Step back. Time for the manipulation tactic. If you love me, you'll obey my commandments. Oh, you didn't obey. You don't love me. Man, you missed the point. You should put that load of guilt on. It doesn't fit. He's just talked about how he has to do all things. He has to do all things. Instead, what I see is he's looking at a culture that, just like those besieged Samaritans, has said, if we build up thick enough walls and high enough walls, nobody can hurt us. So we have 607 or whatever it is, root laws. And if you don't follow those, then you have to go get cleansed. And if you're not doing that, you're not fully in. And there's a few of us, because we know this happened, because Paul, when he's writing, goes back and claims, unto the law, faultless. So there was a group that had so mastered their own self-discipline, which again, self is already off the tangent from what God's trying to do in us. He says, I should be working in you. They've mastered self-discipline to the point that they could be faultless according to this law. So they're saying, see, I can do it. I don't know why you can't do it. And these people are walking around with this burden of guilt. And when Jesus shows up, we see all through the Gospels him trying to tear down those walls about the concept that these guys are perfect and undermine that and say, this is not true. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Oh, they're sacrificing. They've given up everything to follow that law, but they don't have mercy. And he's been doing this, and I picture right here as he's talking about these miracles, people are thinking, well, the Pharisees are probably the ones who do that. They're the ones that are perfect. And he basically says, if you love me, you'll obey what I command. You don't have to worry about the obey part, because if you love me, transformation will come. And a lot of times we feel like, well, but then people are going to start doing whatever they want. If they're doing whatever they want, it means they haven't been transformed yet. That means God's still working. And you look at that woman caught in adultery, as she's dealing with this. She's been caught in the moment, already enough humiliation, but she's dragged in front of Jesus, and I picture a town square, thrown on the ground, and not only is she caught in a sin that's very embarrassing, so there's already a value drop. Secondly, we know what the sin was, value drop. Third, it's worthy of death, big value drop. You're not even worthy of life anymore. But fourth, and a little side note, being caught in adultery takes two. Where's the guy? Oh, well, he's okay because he's a guy. Value drop. She is at the lowest point she could be at. And as Jesus says, yeah, that's in the law. Whichever one of you is sinless, go ahead. And no one can do it. Then when he turns to her and says, neither do I condemn you. I don't hold you guilty. That go and sin no more is not suddenly a reversal. I'm going to build you up. I'm going to protect you, but don't do it again. This is strike two, lady. It's instead a calling to a higher purpose. Do you think she liked what she was doing? Like, hey, it's fun risking getting stoned every day. I really doubt it. In fact, if we take Ellen White's perspective on the whole situation, she actually was brought into this lifestyle because she was defiled by a Pharisee. And she was trapped in this lifestyle. And the concept that that's something she wanted is just nowhere. There's no way that's what she wanted. He's not telling her, you're going to fall in this again. You better not. You better push away from this, because she was trapped. He's saying that unlike the law that says if you've been here, you're stuck. Once you had this defilement, you're done. I'm saying that you actually get a fresh start right now. And for her, rather than a sense of, uh-oh, I better be careful. He let me free this time, but next time I'm goner. She is awakened to a whole new world that she never knew was even possible. She's been told that's not possible. And you zoom out and look at some of the other stories, like the Good Samaritan. It's really easy for us to tell the story about how basically there's this guy hurt in there, and the pastor walks by, and the youth pastor walks by, and man, we think, oh, a youth pastor and a pastor not even carrying that is awful. What a perfect example. But Jesus was not known for being Captain Obvious. Like, here's a truth that's so clear that everyone knows it already, so I'm going to say it again. Instead, he tends to probe and dig and tweak and bring out things that people had not thought of, the things they were not aware of. What he was saying in those texts is that if a priest or a Levite that's on their way to work, which is what they were doing, touches someone who has blood, they have a purification process they have to go through before they can take part again. The law had said, you are dirty, you're unclean, you have to go through a process to get back right with God before you're allowed to do this again. And they're looking at this situation, and maybe they did have compassion. He doesn't say they didn't care at all, I don't think. Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. But they have a whole set of barriers that their customs and their religion had placed on them that they have to come through. And he's bringing up an enemy that's willing to go through that custom, and that's your good neighbor, because caring matters more than this. And then when you look at, especially if you take Ellen White's view on the woman caught in adultery, because she says that the inspiration she was given says that this was actually Mary Magdalene. When she tells the story of being at Simon the Pharisee, Simon the leper's house, when Mary's pouring the fragrant oils on Jesus' head, says that in that moment, she was the only person on the planet who understood that Jesus was actually going to die. Everyone else still held a false assumption about what he was going to do, but she got it because she knew who he really was. She knew the power of what he really had to offer, and that it was a freedom from guilt. It was a freedom from oppression. It was not another layer of guilt. And as he talks about these things, she understands that it's not about physical power. It's not about a judgment on the Romans. It's about something that happens inside because she'd experienced it. And that is why she invests this money, goes through the humiliation, but it also says that fragrance throughout Jesus' last days was the only reminder that people would understand someday, and that they suffered with him. Because the reason so many of the other ones weren't going to help go carry the cross, have you ever wondered that? Why aren't his disciples running out there to carry the cross when the Romans are looking for someone to do it? It's because they were going to touch blood and it's Passover. If you're a Jew and it's Passover, you do not get to take part in this huge set of festivities if you touch blood. So if they help Jesus, they're ruining their chance to be a part of this, and they are so trapped by the constructs of what it is to be good and to be clean that they've lost sight of helping someone in need, especially Jesus himself. And I think that's what's happening in Samaria here. People feel so protected by their walls and barricading themselves off from the enemy that they're still facing the same end. Death is still imminent. Misery is everywhere. And yet they stay barricaded. And it's this group in here that says there's got to be something better than this. At least if we go out there, there's a 50-50 chance. They'll either kill us or let us go. We don't know which one. But let's give it a shot. Let's go out there. And even though the enemy's out there, we know what God's capable of, and it's better than what's happening here. How many of us are willing to do that? I've had a lot of people ask me why I keep doing the job I do. You know, I'll go back to a reunion and class reunion, and I have a friend that's a Hollywood stunt double, and I have friends that are doctors and attorneys, and I have ones that work for the Department of Defense. And when I go and I say, hey, I'm an Adventist school principal, they go, oh, that's nice. Because it's not exactly their pinnacle of glory. Especially those that had a bad experience. And I get the question on a fairly regular basis, so what made you choose that? Is it more fun than you thought? Yes. Yes. Principling is a riot. You should try it. Recommend it for everyone. Just fun and ease. And I like to joke that it's my chance to learn solitaire well enough I can play in the principal solitaire tournament since we have nothing to do all day. But the thing is that when I look at the situation, we watch our kids struggle with the same things we all struggle with. We can look around the church and we know the loads other people have. We'll walk out feeling our own sense of emptiness. And I think I've shared here before, I was at a church once where I asked somebody once, I'd done a sermon, I was standing at the back shaking hands, and someone came through and I said, hey, how you doing? He says, oh, I'm doing great, God's good, thank you. And I said, are you really doing well? Are you really doing good? And he just looked at me and he says, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. I said, really? He says, yeah, really, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. And I said, well, are you really doing well? He says, I'm dying of cancer. And I said, and no one here knows that? He says, not yet. No one's asked. And I think we've heard stories like that, or we've felt stories like that, where there's things happening and we keep it in. Because we see the friendly faces and everyone looking so snazzy in their suits and pink ties. Thank you for noticing. And we think, oh, that's great. And when we smile and we shake a hand and we say, hey, how you doing? They say, oh, I'm doing great, thank you. And they say, great. And then we move on. But we all know the weight that we have. And I think most people here have thought about how you wish there was that person that true community. Someone that really knew how to lift you up. In fact, you often don't know how to. If someone asked you, what can I do for you? You wouldn't know what to say. But you wish there was someone that knew it. But then you watch your kids and they're dealing with that times 50. The pressures of society, the pressures for what you're supposed to look like, act like, feel like, what your expectations are in terms of behavior. And when you look at church behavior and what your morality should be, and if you're good enough or not good enough, the weight just gets piled on more and more and more. And I've sat across the table in my office from students that when I ask them, how are you doing, really? When they start sharing, it's not just, we like to say, well, there's these kids, I think they look depressed. This is kids that aren't depressed, kids that look like they're at the top of their game. The number of times I've had someone say, I'm not doing good. I hate myself. It's shocking how often. And I think there's a lot of us here that you deal with, maybe it's a friend, a neighbor, a nephew, a child that has those things. But where do you go? What do you tell them? What do you tell yourself? What do you tell your brother who's dealing with this? And the thing is that we have, the reason I do what I do is that I see a potential where I've got a school where there's 200 kids that are there to learn. They're there to figure out life. And lots of them really want some type of a solution, and it's not about chemistry. It's not about that world history exam. It's not about 7th grade English. It's not about learning how to read. It's about how do I become something that allows me to be happy inside and feel a sense of purpose. We as a community of churches have to start doing something to invest in our children, to invest in each other, that transforms the heart, not just modify behavior. I can look around and I can tell people what to do and not to do all day long. That's easy. It's neat. If I as principal can say, well, parents these days just don't value what I value, and pastors aren't engaged in this, and the churches fight so much that they can't, and kids these days don't seem to have motivation in the media, I'm absolved. It's not my fault anymore. And that is neat and clean. Because even if something bad happens, I sure did everything I could, because I sat here and didn't do all that stuff. But it starts getting messy when we say, what do we do to reach in? And that's what I think the difference is between these stories, is that God is trying to reach out and say, neither do I condemn you. There's no guilt. Guilt is not from God, because guilt takes you away from peace. Guilt takes you away from a calling to purpose. And instead it says you have a responsibility here that you're not owning up to. And it takes God out and puts him as this little helper. If you'll do your work and you'll pull your weight and you'll fix your problems, then if you run into a problem, then ask God to help. And he's your little helper. He'll clean up the mess at the end. And that is contrary to what the Bible talks about over and over and over. And yet it's become something where every time we make a mistake, every time we fall short, I just picture that little red angel, bing, that they always have in the cartoons popping up saying, wow, you really messed that one up. You know what you should do? You should talk to Jesus. And we don't think of it that way. We think about Satan always trying to say, don't talk to Jesus. But isn't it so much better if he says, yeah, go to Jesus. I'll show you the way. Isn't that just a great method? Yeah, you better really grovel, because you've really messed it up this time, and you have not fixed this. This is your 18th time. And you know what? If you in your forgiveness prayers forget that thing you did in 1978, you haven't prayed for forgiveness. And you know, what if? And so we do that prayer, forgive me for anything I forgot to ask for already. And then a week later, you're like, now forgive me again. Or there's that thing you know that you really feel the most guilty about, and so you've prayed for it 8,000 times. If God's taking that each time, us praying again is undermining his capability. We are taking it and placing it back on our shoulders. And I think that the way that we're trained to be parents, to be educators, to be church members, is to correct behavior through reminders of guilt. We're all trained that way. And I think the first thing we have to do is start shedding our own sense of guilt, our own sense of obligation to become this on our own, and just entrust God to do the work. And if I make a mistake and I have guilt, I mean, just think if right now, and I'm going to use Clyde because you all probably want to do this. What if I walked up to Clyde right now and just started choking the guy? Right? Clyde, that's it. If all of a sudden later, I feel so guilty, I can't believe I did that. Then the next time I know Clyde's going to be around, I'm nervous. I'm afraid to go approach him. In fact, I might avoid a situation where we'd be there together because I'm feeling guilty. I'm afraid. What if he's mad? There's this weight on my shoulders. But think of it instead, if you look at the woman caught in adultery, neither do I condemn you, go and sin no more, as a call to action, a call to something better. If I feel like there's something better out there, and I do that, and I feel bad, instantly that call to something better makes me want to be active towards fixing it. I want to do something to repair that, and I can pray about that, and I can go up to Clyde right away. In fact, I'm going to seek out a time to find Clyde and say, I am so sorry. I don't know where that came from. I'm working on it. Can you forgive me? What else can we do? Let's play golf. I'll bring my golf clubs, and he'll be like, it's a little too soon for that one, my friend. No weapons. But it's a proactive approach. We reach out rather than pull back. And I think that that's the story of Samaria, is finally they said, we're just going to reach out. We're stepping out, risking ourselves first. We're not expecting the other group to finally give up first. I'm going to step out first. And I think that if every parent, every teacher, every church member took people that there's antagonism between and we were the first ones to step out. If we had tension between us and our kids or us and another church member and we stepped out, what life could be like. And I think that's the biggest thing, is we know that there's something more. We know we're called to something more. And yet we're trapped with this weight and this frustration. And so the number one thing that I think I take from this message is that here are these people with leprosy. They don't even have hope for a long future. But they said, there's got to be something better. I'm going to step out.